guys, today we're going to be talking about section 1.2, and it's all about the algebraic properties. And there are three main properties that I'd like you guys to know, and that by knowing them is really going to help you throughout the year to see different patterns and things that we work on with problems. So the first property that we're going to talk about is the commutative property. Now the commutative property is all about the order in which the problem appears. Now there are two operations that the commutative property works for, and this is only addition and multiplication. So addition and multiplication, it doesn't matter what order you have the numbers. It won't change the answer. So I could, for example, I could have 2 plus 3 equals 5, or I could have 3 plus 2 equals 5. So I just switched those numbers around and got the exact same answer. The same thing works for multiplication. 2 times 3 equals 6, and if I switch them around, 3 times 2 also equals 6. So if I wanted to rewrite them to show how this works for the commutative property, let's start with the addition. I could write 2 plus 3 is the same thing as 3 plus 2. And that's the commutative property, okay? Also, now for multiplication, to prove the commutative property works, I could say 2 times 3 is the same thing as 3 times 2. Okay, so that's all the commutative property is. Changing the order does not change the answer to the problem. Now it's important to remember that this does not work for subtraction or division. So if you think of it this way, 2 minus 3 gives us negative 1, and if I switch those, 3 minus 2 gives us positive 1. So that's why the commutative property does not work for those two operations. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. The next one is the identity property. Now there's the identity property of 1, and there's the identity property of 0. The identity property for either one talks about you can multiply or add something to a number, and it wouldn't change the answer. So the number would stay itself. Okay? I always like to think of the identity property as, when you're little, your mom might say something like, "Oh, honey, you're so perfect. Don't change who you are. Keep your identity." And that's what the identity property is. You're going to keep the identity of the number when you use an operation. Now again, the identity property only works for the two operations of multiplication and addition. It does not work for subtraction and division. So let's talk about the identity property of 1. If we want to keep the identity, let's take the number 2. If we want to keep the identity of that number, what could I multiply by the number 2 to keep it itself? 1. 2 times 1 is just equal to 2. Okay, so that's the identity property of multiplication, or the identity property of 1. 2 times 1 equals 2. So let's talk about addition. There's also the identity property of addition. What could I add to the number 2 so it wouldn't change the number? It would keep its identity. 2 plus 0. 2 plus 0 is equal to 2. Okay, so that's the identity property of addition, or you could call it the identity property of 0. Okay, so that's the identity property. Now, the last one I want to talk about is the distributive property. Now the distributive property is a little bit more complex, and we're going to spend a whole day on the distributive property in the coming weeks, but I wanted to give you a little preview of it. So distributive property is, down the line, is going to make your life a lot easier when you are multiplying. So when you're multiplying, things that you see in parentheses. So if you have a number on the outside, and then numbers on the inside, numbers or variables, which you'll see in the future. You can use multiplication to distribute that outside number to everything that's on the inside of the parentheses. And that's just a shortcut, and it's going to help you simplify your answers in the future. Okay, and you'll see some examples of that coming up. Alright, now there's one more property that I'd like you to squeeze into your notes that isn't necessarily written. And this is just the 0 property of multiplication. So I'd like you to write that on your notes. 0 property of multiplication. Now, multiplication and 0 kind of go hand in hand. There's a special little rule with multiplication. And you guys should know this from way back when, but I'd just like you to have it down because this is a property you might see as well. So if you take the number 5 and you multiply it by 0, what are you going to get? 0. If you take the number 1,000 and multiply it by 0, what are you going to get? 0. So the 0 property of multiplication means you can multiply any number you want by 0 and it's always going to be 0. Now we know that, but I just wanted you to get the name of the property down. Okay? So we're going to practice identifying these and using these properties from here on out. See ya!